Church. And thanks to all of you for being here in this session this evening. As already announced, you have a handout for each of the 3 sessions. If for some reason you didn't receive it, just send an email to any member of the core team and they will send it on to you. I'll be following those handouts fairly closely. Now, I'm also going to use some PowerPoint images. So if you bear with me for a moment, I'm going to bring up my images and then we will proceed. Okay, so over the 3 sessions, I'm going to speak to kind of 3 broad areas. The hunger for dialogue at the round table, which we heard a lot about in the synod over the past 2 years. A more integrated theology arising from spirituality, related to some of the words with which Diarmuid has introduced me. And then reworking tradition, revisiting the scriptures and theology. In each of the 3 sessions, I want to bring in a poetic tone. So I'm going to offer you a bit of poetry at the beginning of each of the 3 sessions. And this is my one for tonight, which is a meditation on John's Gospel, verse 9:21. Now, chapter 9 of John's Gospel is all about the blind man. And there's a whole series of interactions going on in that story. And at one stage, the parents, probably a bit frustrated with all the people quizzing them, says, why don't you ask him himself? He's an adult. He's well capable of answering. And around that one line, this poem is constructed. Shut up, you blinded beggar. You have no right to speak. You distract the Holy Master in his work. Of course he has a right to speak. And what gives you the right to marginate a person just lacking in his sight? And anyhow, he's old enough to speak now for himself. It might have been his parents that caused him to be blind, their failure to observe the laws of God and worship God on high. How sure you are, you hypocrites, as if you could comprehend the ways of God with human beings, your theories can't defend. And anyhow, he's old enough to speak now for himself. We think he's just pretending as he gropes about the place and probably can't see too very far. You're wrong again, you hypocrites. His eyes are open wide, while you remain deluded of vision deep inside. And anyhow, he's old enough to speak now for himself. So tell us, you his parents, was he born blind like this? That being the case, we take it that something's now amiss. From early years of childhood, he could not see a thing. But now he sees, and praise be God for liberating him. And anyhow, he's old enough to speak now for himself. So tell us what he did to you, all that messing with the clay, while breaking all the holy laws upon this Sabbath day. I simply know I once was blind, but now the day is clear. No longer codependent, I'm an adult without fear. And anyhow, I'm old enough to speak now for myself. On that spirit, I introduce you to this great quote from 1 Corinthians. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I gave up childish ways. I'm not sure entirely what Paul intended when he made that statement. Did he mean it exactly as we are reading it now? But there's one thing sure, the Christian churches, and indeed the world religions at large, have not taken this statement seriously. Because across all the great religions, the approach is that what we learn as children is what we need to hold on to for the rest of our lives. And in Christian catechetics across all the Christian churches, that is still very much the emphasis. But according to this statement, what we learned as a child or what we learned as children has its place and is appropriate for us at that stage in our lives. But as we move on to other stages, then we need to leave behind, or at least outgrow, that which we were cherishing as children and move into other ways, more adult ways of appropriating and understanding our faith. And that's the challenge of adult faith development and some of the challenges that we will be looking at over these 3 sessions. Now, this is number 1 on your page, the 2 models that we're looking at here, and which will influence everything I have to say over the next, this week and the next 2 as well. So in the pre-evolutionary model, truth is invested in wise individuals representing a parental hierarchical system. What you learned as a child, you're meant to hold on to for the rest of your life. Truth comes from the top down, from the kind of parental hierarchical structure, seeking domination and control. In this model, truth is usually understood to be static, unchanging, and monolithic. Monolithic means one version of the truth only. In the evolutionary model of the times we're now living in and have been in really for the past 50 years or more, truth itself evolves. As relational adults seek out the truth through a range of discerning groups. And that's the hunger, the desire that we heard articulated, and which, in my opinion, was not well acknowledged or appropriately acknowledged in the Synod over the past 2 years. All this talk about the wonder of the round table. Those of us who belong to religious orders, or those of us who have been involved in the business world, know that we've been using the model of the round table for at least the past 50 years. So you begin to wonder, where was our beloved church? The idea dominated both sessions of the Synod, articulating a deep hunger for another way of coming and appropriating truth. Consensual process, that which arises from deeper, more discerning dialogue, is considered to be a surer way to deeper truth. Now, I want to walk you very quickly through these life stages, just to give you a sense of the foundations, if you like, that we're using when we're looking at adult faith development. What you're looking at the screen now is something many of you will be familiar with, Erickson's famous life stages. And then in the 1970s, this man, James Fowler, took up those with some other people and began to look at the implications for growing into faith along these various life stages. That's some of the material now I want to share with you now over the next number of minutes. So the early stages of usually 1 to 7 or 8 years of age, known as the primal, the intuitive, and the mythic. There are 2 basic qualities that are laid down here. And if they're not laid here, then they'll be sought out over an entire lifetime. And those 2 qualities are security and trust. People like myself, and I know a number of you have worked with homeless people, you probably have become aware of this one already. Even in this bitterly cold weather that we're having here in parts of Western Europe, a lot of some homeless people will insist in staying out rather than going into shelters, no matter how dreadful the conditions. And many homeless people do find it very difficult to adjust to being indoors and feeling okay indoors. And it's basically down to one fact. they did not have a home life as young people. And therefore, those two basic qualities of security and trust were never laid in appropriate foundations. And so the lack of those two key qualities then will kind of haunt them for much of their lives. Now, obviously, those matters can be addressed sometimes through therapy and counseling. Therefore, in terms of a spirituality here, trust, obviously, it's trust in God, it's trust in life, it's trust in the fundamental goodness of things, is one of the ways we would be approaching it. I move on then rather quickly to the teenage years, traditionally known as the rebellious years. And again, in terms of development, what we need to try and honor here is the right to rebel, and the helping even our teenagers how to articulate the rebellion, how to acknowledge it, how to speak to it, how to feel at home in it, and so forth. Therefore, we run into big problems here then in our educational systems when our catechetics is aiming, as I've already said, not just in the Christian traditions, but you find this in all the major world religions, that by the end of the teens, which traditionally have been understood as 18 to 20 years of age, they should have a good foundation in the essential elements of their faith. Now, they may have the theory, but they're not going to be able to internalize it. And that's certainly true in the world of today. Secondly, the notion of the teenage rebellious reality is now extending well into the 20s, and in some cases, maybe into the 30s, because of a whole range of sociological, economic, and political factors in our world. And that brings me then to what's now known as the stage of emerging adulthood. So at an earlier time, up to about 1970, this was known as the adult stage, and would have been aged approximately from 18 to 25, during which time you got your job, you got your qualifications, and you had your bank account, you drove your car, you were in a serious relationship, monogamous, heterosexual, and in some cases you were already married. All that has dramatically changed in the past 20 or 30 years. And for a lot of psychologists now looking at growth and development, this stage is considered to be one of the most delicate and precarious. And we're now aging it approximately from 20 to 35. And this is the stage in which a whole range of deep questions are arising for people. Some of this has to do with the insecurity of the world we're living in. Some of it has to do with the very fluid nature of relationships and human sexuality these days. A lot of it has to do with the power of social media. It has been noted that extreme groups like ISIS and others attract predominantly people of this age group. Rates of suicide across Europe are within this age group. Now, I'm sure we've all known people in this age group who are making a wonderful go of things, absolutely. But there are a substantial proportion also that find it a struggle. And because they're young and because they're virulent and because they feel, and in a sense, the world is telling them they should be in control of their destiny, they will be reluctant usually to go and seek help when things do not work out well. They're also the group of people that may leave home by 20 years of age, but unfortunately, quite frequently will be back home again by the age of 24 or 25. So this is an age group that raises huge pastoral concerns. Now, what all that is to say to a group like We Are Church, I'm not sure, other than to kind of reassure you, maybe, those of you that are wondering, well, how do we bring the young people into the church? How do we bring the young people into a context of communal faith? Why can't we get these young adults on board? These are probably not the right questions to be asking right now. We're dealing with quite a different landscape here. I'm not saying we should give up on these people, but we do need some rather new and different approaches in trying to reach them. We then come to the stage of midlife, which was very popular in the 1980s and 1990s, approximately 40 to 55 years of age. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, many years ago made the observation that this was the stage he felt in which people made an adult appropriation of their faith for the first time. And that usually resulted from some kind of a life crisis. I'm not sure he would say that if he was around today, because I think the life crises he had in mind are happening at a range of other stages now in people's lives. The glamour has kind of worn off midlife a bit. We don't hear that much about it anymore. And I think mainly it is, at least in part, because people in this age bracket, many of them do go and get the support of counseling and therapy as issues arise for them. Then the next stage, 55 to 70, used to be known as the retirement stage. And that is when people used to take early retirement, which of course is no longer the case in many countries now as the working age is being increased. But I guess it is still a stage in which people are looking at various adjustments as they're beginning to move into their older years of life. And it's also the stage in which people want to pick up and do things maybe they had always desired to do and didn't have the opportunities, including the exploration of deeper spiritual questions. And then finally, I come to my hobby horse, and I hope I can speak to this without doing an injustice to the other stages. So this is the 70 plus, the stage of the wise elder. Now, on your page, you will see there's a note on this about halfway down the page. That in this stage, there are two tendencies that have been identified and have been noted. For many people, there's the feeling fearful at the imminent prospect of meeting God, and therefore choosing the safe, conventional approach to faith. The advice sometimes in religious circles given to these people, go away and say your prayers and prepare to meet your God. We're running in here to probably one of the most serious prejudices in our world today. And that's the prejudice of ageism, which does a horrendous injustice to the people that I believe are going to be critically important, not merely to the future of faith and the future of religions, but to the future of human civilization. As of the year 2020, we have now more people on the planet over the age of 60 than under 16 for the first time ever. The world population is growing older and will continue to grow older. And the place of older people in our world is going to be critically important for the future of our world. And so then there is the other development that's happening, but unfortunately is so seriously overshadowed by the prejudice that we rarely take note of it. And therefore I bring you back to the note on the page. The second tendency, an altruistic, love-embracing sense of life, a deep sense of gratitude, whatever the circumstances. This is much more widespread than we think, rarely recognized, and one of the most serious areas for pastoral and developmental neglect. Those of us on this program tonight, I think if we were to do a survey, I suspect the average age is somewhere between 60 and 70 years of age. And we are the right people doing the right thing at this time. People often say to me, why don't you share this wisdom with the younger people? Why can't we try to bring them into our churches and help them to become more interested? No, the people we should be focusing primarily on, in my opinion, are the wise elders of this age category. This is where the future is. It's a real paradigm shift. And as I've already said, we're encountering massive resistance and huge, very dangerous and misleading prejudices. And so I do invite a group like We Are Church to really look seriously at the challenge of this life stage and its implications, not merely for the future of churches and religions, but indeed for the future of our entire civilization. The other picture that I'm showing you there, so you have Rosa Parks, the first Black woman in America that sat on a bus and felt she had the right to sit anywhere she wanted to, and then the great Nelson Mandela of South Africa. And then we have the Council of the Elders in the other picture, of which our own Mary Robinson is the current chairperson. Now, just for those of you that want to explore this issue maybe a little bit more deeply, one of the key people in the research behind it is the late Theodore Roszak, one time professor of cultural history in Berkeley University, died in 2011. So his first book by which he became fairly famous was The Making of a Counterculture, published in 1969. And then his last book, published in 2009, The Making of an Elder Culture. Now, admittedly, if you read this book, it's very American-based, but it gives some very valuable insights into what is transforming for this particular age group. He's looking at their significance economically and politically. I'm looking at it more spiritually, but also culturally, because as I've already said, I do think this age stage and this group are hugely important, and for me at least, are key players in the development of adult faith development. So this is on your page down towards the end. The substantial challenges then that we're looking at, a kind of a broad overview, so to speak. So awareness of what is actually transpiring in our world today. And that's not an easy one to kind of get an overview of in a way that can be held and in a way that can be explored. We're looking there really at what Vatican II called reading the signs of the times. Now, it's also closely related to number 2, our world of mass information. And don't be too distracted by all the talk about AI, artificial intelligence, which I know is a major issue at the present time. Because before this issue ever came on the cards, for at least the past 30 years, we have been living in a world of mass information. And that changes the personality and the outlook of many people. More and more people become curious. More and more people begin asking questions. More and more people try to honor that adult opinion or that adult insight. A bit like the poem I read for you at the beginning. So many people, I'm sure many of you in this program tonight have been saying, but I'm an adult. Can you not hear what I'm saying? Can you not at least listen to my opinion on the matter? And so because we do live in this world, there's a huge range of questioning and questing going on. And much of that is spiritual, without necessarily being formally religious. And from within the context of our churches, some people ask the questions and get maybe satisfactory answers, but a lot of the time, unfortunately, they don't. And so they move to the margins or maybe move out completely. And so once upon a time, it would have been standard, for example, the priest and maybe also some select lay people working closely with the priest, when asked a question of faith, and you might get the answer, well, the church teaches. If you're given that answer today, a lot of people will just walk away. And it's not that the answer in itself is wrong. It's this expectation that people have. They want to dialogue, they want conversation, they want to mutually explore things together. And my personal view, and certainly the view held by those of us involved in adult faith development, this desiring is coming from the Spirit of God. It's not just a secular endowment arising from social media or anything like that. Now, related into that is number 3 on the screen, we are dealing with new wine today, and unfortunately still pouring it into old wineskins. And that's one of the major problems that we have with our catechetics. This expectation, which is now completely unreal, that by the age of 18 or 19, they should have a good grasp of their faith. That just doesn't make any developmental sense anymore. So therefore, those of you then that are parents and grandparents are no doubt asking, what then do we do with our young people? I'm not sure. The bit that I think I am reasonably sure about is if we can somehow get our adults more informed in their faith, then they will organically and naturally communicate the values of faith to our young people. And again, I don't want to sound too negative or dismissive of our schools, which often are struggling under a lot of various pressures. But the idea of communicating faith through an educational system does not work anymore. Faith is fundamentally organic, meaningful faith is an experiential dimension. It comes through meaningful, intimate contact with significant others. And I'm talking there about parents, I'm talking about the home, and I'm talking about guardians. Teachers have a contribution to make, no doubt. But teachers can only develop that which has the foundations already laid in the home. So therefore, the faith development of our adults, it seems to me, is absolutely critical. Now, when, where, and how that can be done, I don't have an answer to that one, unfortunately. But perhaps part of the answer is in number 4, networking. And that's what we're doing in this program tonight and for the next 2 nights. We're a network. We're a group of people that are hungering and desiring, and we know in our hearts there's something deeper going on. We want to connect around it, we want to understand it better, and we want to find a vocabulary through which we can communicate more clearly around it among ourselves and with others. That's the principle of networking. And it's going to be a very important principle for the next number of years, right across the development of all the religions, the churches, and the evolutionary development of faith in general. Number 5, transformation from the ground up. Now, I'll be dealing more directly with this in the next few sessions. So there's still that culture in our world, in our churches and the religions, that you have the enlightened people at the top, whether it's the official authority figures or whether it's the more learned people. I think the growth and development, the work of the Spirit that's now unfolding and will unfold over the next number of years will be a movement from the ground up. And in that context, we all have a significant role to play. And again, let me emphasize, watch out for the wise elders here. They have an enormous contribution to that wisdom coming from the ground up, that whole experience of a lifetime, brought now into that deeper reflection for those of them that are moving in that direction. They are really prophetic and significant people for our future. Number 6 is a very sensitive area, but I want to name it because I think it does need to be named. And it's the big weakness in the 2 sessions of the Synod in Rome that happened last year and the year before. Clericalism, or the priesthood as we have known it over the past, well, indeed, I suppose, ever since the Council of Trent, in the case of the Catholic Church, is in irreversible decline. It's dying out, and it needs to die out. This way of leadership within the context of faith is actually a relatively recent development in the big history of our species. It really belongs to a stage of about 6,000 years ago. Now, 6,000 out of a story of 7 million is pretty small. And that particular mode of leadership in context of faith, whether in the Christian churches or in the world religions, belongs to a previous paradigm. What the leadership will look like in the future remains to be seen. Again, I think when the wisdom from the ground up is allowed a greater freedom, a greater affirmation, and invited into the more challenging contexts, we'll begin to see what that leadership will look like. It will not be about significant individuals, in my opinion. It'll be very much more about teams. Again, the principle of the round table. But certainly clericalism, as we have known it, is dying. We need to help it to die. And indeed, we need even to talk about responsibly about what the funeral might begin to look like. I'm a grief therapist. That's where that comment is coming from. And then finally, a church of the future. So the very foundations of the church, as outlined particularly in the work of Paul, the church is about ecclesia. It's about community. The church in its true essence has always been about that. If you look at documents that have come out from Rome in the Catholic context ever since Vatican II, it's very interesting to look at the shape of the documents. Chapter 1 says exactly what I'm saying here on the screen. The church is about community. And then chapter 2 is where things begin to go wrong. Being in communion with the Pope, the hierarchy, and particularly with the bishops. And then chapter 5, what would community mean among the people of God? The material in chapter 5 should be in chapter 2, and the material in chapter 2 should be in chapter 5. Once again, the clericalism trips us up. It gets in the way. And so, yes, just as in the past and right through history at its finest moments, the church has been about community, the attraction of the round table. And the church of the future will be about community. And so what would dynamic communities begin to look like? And networking is going to be an important stepping stone, it seems to me, in helping us to recreate and reclaim that sense of ecclesial, of authentic ecclesial community. Okay, so then moving towards the end, this summary note is actually in the middle of your page of the handout you have. Growth and faith, therefore, we need to look at it as an experience that happens over an entire lifetime. And most of that span is in what we call the adult years. And I think it's when we acknowledge that, then we need to go back and revisit. So what would early formation of faith look like for our children? What dimensions of it maybe can still be done in schools? And how do we begin to equip the parents to do the real work, which, as I've already said, I think can only and should be done primarily in the home. Secondly, faith is not static. It can never be boiled down to dogmas or doctrines. But it becomes static when growth and development are neglected, as has been the case for a number of centuries, actually. And then thirdly, faith and the need for wise elders. And I won't repeat what I've already said. I think I've highlighted that point adequately in the earlier part of my session. Let's just be still for a moment. And then I'll be inviting Denise to lead us forward in the question and answer session.
I'm going to turn.
Okay, Denise, over to you.
It was just so enriching and a wonderful context which to anchor this evening and the subsequent two sessions as we explore this whole concept of adult faith in the 21st century. So I think the best thing is maybe we could take the PowerPoint. Okay, back to yourself. And you allowed us that little time of reflection. So many rich ideas there. So as Chris said earlier, if you go down to reactions at the bottom, the bar, and if you press that, you'll see inside it, there's a yellow hand. You can press that. I think that'll make it easier because there's so many people on joining us in this session. So